Hello, happy Monday to you. I am Samuel Trapp, and this is the first show of the week, isn't it? On Dem Radio. And here I am, coming to you live from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. Listen every day at damradio.com/live for great music like some of that was just playing. I've actually got a couple of songs I picked out for this program today, and I don't know why. I'm usually not a huge into the music arena on my programs, having plenty to talk about with the lunacy of the world today. But I have a couple of songs that I don't know what happened. They showed up in a playlist I was listening to whilst driving somewhere, and it was a long time since I heard either one of these songs. So you know what I did? I added them to the mix, and we're going to be listening to them even later, probably around the half-hour mark. I got three sort of concrete topics I'm going to discuss today with you, but then and by the way, feel free to call in 573-746-8020 should you feel the urge to discuss any of these things or have an opinion on the news of the day. Don't go off the wall with weird stuff from out of nowhere. I don't really care for that. I'd like to stick with the show. The big news, everything on everybody's lips is about the dinner. Let's call it the Correspondents Dinner, which has been a joke most of the time anyway, that you watch that thing. It's just a time for people to get together and congratulate themselves on being in power and controlling the world and blah, blah, blah. And every once in a while to make fun of each other. The old Trumpster didn't go for many years because they were beating up on him so much. Do you know, I always used to say that if they beat up on you a lot, that really means that they're frightened of you. And so if that's all they've got, that's the tool, is to beat up on you, to laugh about you, to kick you out of the room, and that's all they got. That means you're a pretty powerful mofo. Wouldn't that be right? You're now, and so I've said that about the Trumpster. You know, you can hate him, you can dislike him, you can disagree, like I do, on many, 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 many things internationally with what the old Trump monster does. But he's a hell of a lot better than the O'Bidenator, whatever he was, and the Obaminator before him. Those guys are nuts. And I'm starting to worry. You know the saying, the whole world is crazy, but me and thee, and often I worry about thee, you know, that kind of thing. You know, if you're looking around the room and wondering, you know, who's the craziest, it's probably you, right? And but anyway, it's a crazy old world out there, especially right now. And this attack, I've been listening to things, 4 or 5 programs on it yesterday, commentaries, some of the news stuff, and what this lunacy means. And I don't know, it just seemed, and I listened to several that called it a false flag sort of thing, and I listened to several that were, oh, gee, look, just shows how wonderful Trump is, and everybody's after Trump, and therefore we go. I saw the little snippet where Carolyn Levitt said shots will be fired tonight, you know, so like that. She made some kind of commentary like that right before the program. I wrote most of the speech, or I participated in writing the speech, and shots will be fired tonight. Well, you know, a little bit apropos, don't you think? But there you have it. It's I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So, you know, here on International Flavor, where the truth just tastes better, we wonder if the truth will ever be known about any of this. I suppose the biggest question for me is, why isn't this guy dead? And I don't mean that he should be. I'm not into this, you know, shoot first, ask questions later, normally. But if you watch the little videos, they didn't jump to protect Trump. Everybody ran for J.D. Vance. It's like, let's save J.D. And they didn't guard the president. It just looks a little on the odd side to me. And that maybe it was the way it was supposed to be, but Trump's just sitting there Nothing happened. Just wonder what's going on, and nobody's protecting him. But here in America, unfortunately, this is always just another incident, another headline. And we're far too comfortable with this sort of chaos. I mean, I'm even here joking about it. It's disgusting. And, this is not how the world is supposed to be. But, why don't we slow it down just a tiny bit, wind it back a tiny, tiny bit, and look at what happened at the White House Correspondents Dinner. And I don't know, maybe it is just an isolated act of violence. Maybe it is something more telling, more revealing about a system that is becoming more and more volatile to, especially the participants. And me from my Civic Outlaws broadcasts on Fridays and my continual discussions of, neocons, all of the Rhino chat, and all of the horror story of alleged leadership today, where the leadership portion of leadership is definitely lacking. Power is not, but leadership definitely is. And I wouldn't follow any of these people. To try to take over a drugstore, no way. This is not the people that I would admire as a leader or want to follow or execute a plan. I don't think so. And I keep looking at this and just going, what are these people thinking? And it's unfortunately the obtuse bureaucracy, which is all power all the time, and that's that. And so I hate to be so blunt about it, but geez, you can always, you can always tell when the bureaucrats are in charge. You get endless wars, you get stuff that makes no sense all the way down the line. You get massive money. I remember when I was actually living in Washington, D.C. and checking out the $30,000 conference table because we had money left over toward the end of the year, or the bag of screws way back then that you would find these bolts that you could buy in any Ace Hardware for $3, and you're charging $78 or something for a bunch of screws because a government contractor is involved. You watch people. Like my buddy telling me several weeks ago that he, bidding on a state contract meant he had to increase the rates of pay for his workers, which are just service. And I don't mean just. I mean I just mean that their pay rate was in the $20 an hour range anyway. And he found out in order to apply for a government contract, he'd have to pay them $45 an hour when they were working for the state. Or where they're working for a municipality. He's got to pay prevailing wage. And that is contracting 101. If you're going to jump in, the best bet is to triple charge for everything, because that's what everybody else is doing. And frankly, that's what they expect, because the bureaucrat wants to go in and go, oh my God. It's like the rich person who likes to flaunt his money and going, oh my God, it cost me $8,000 to fix my muffler on my car. Isn't that terrible? Well, yeah, it is terrible, you idiot. Why would you pay $8,000 to fix your car? And go get a new one, do something else. But the people who got to focus on the cash all the time, that's the bureaucrat. Oh, look at it, geez, we got this contract. They want to go home and tell their spouse that, oh, gee, I had to deal with some multi-million-dollar contracts, not telling anybody that, oh, by the way, we could have gotten a competitor bid for $300,000, but we can't hire that guy. Why? Because he's not paying prevailing wage. You can't do that. We have to pay 3 times more. So when you look at the failures of government, you wonder, at least I do, if the failures of government are what occurred at the Correspondents' Dinner, when they rushed to protect the vice president and leave Donald Trump sitting on a chair. I don't know. At the Hilton, during one of the most high-profile political and media gatherings in the U.S. every year, an armed individual, I think they said he was 32 or something like that, made his way into the building. He had a room there. He wasn't outside on the street. He wasn't stopped in some distant perimeter. He was inside the hotel. He was a guest. He was carrying weapons that should have never been anywhere near that event. At some point, near a security screening area, shots were fired. Law enforcement did respond quickly. An officer was struck, but protected by a vest. The attacker was stopped before reaching the ballroom itself. You got pictures of him laying on the floor. No blood, no shots, no nothing. And there's got to be armed people all over that place. And nobody, and I'm not saying they should have been, but that's a fact, and where the president, the vice president, concentration of political and media folks were hanging out. And that's the official version. That's the version that, fits into your little news package. You hear, process, oh, geez, another nut came to get it. But if you believe that, then I think you might be just missing the point the tiniest of bits. Because what you had in that building at that moment wasn't something you should, just ignore. It's something that should make any serious observer pause. Think about it. You had the sitting president, you had the vice president, you had cabinet-level officials, you had the upper tier of the national press, people who filter, shape, mold, and distribute what we're supposed to understand with the way they sell it to us. They're supposed to mold all that to us. And all in one place, in one room, not just a dinner. This isn't just tradition. This is concentrated power, political power. You get invited. This 32-year-old kid, engineer from California, I'm sure, probably isn't among that list of people, okay? You have political power, information power, symbolized, symbolic, all of it, power under one roof. By its very nature, it shouldn't function as a hardened security environment, but they should have one, right? Because the question isn't simply what did this guy do? It's how is it possible that he was in a position to do it at all? That's the question. Hotels are complicated. I used to go into D.C. hotels. I've been at functions nowhere near as vital as this, but constantly when I was in the on-site inspection agency in the military, we were subordinate to the State Department in a lot of stuff. We worked basically with the foreign ministries, right? And so when a team of diplomats would arrive from the Soviet Union, later Russia, many other countries, and we would go to there was always an advance team, right? And that advance team would go clear the spaces, clear of everything. The Soviet people would have their security people come in and do the exact same thing, setting it up. There are people outside, that generally didn't sit in on the meetings or anything, but security was a big part of it. And it was, you had your briefings before and against. All the security people would call you in and go, okay, here's how security is going to work. Here's where you enter in. Don't bring those diplomats any other way but this way, blah, blah, blah. And you'd get all of these instructions on what you're going to do. And I assume that anybody who's going to this correspondents' dinner isn't just going to the hotel and having a hotel security guard do it when the president and vice president and tons of other important dignitaries, prior presidents, are going to be sitting there. There's got to be security up the, wazoo. There's got to be tons of it. And then hotels are complicated environments. We all know this. Many entrances, many exits. They have to be because of laws and because of what we have. And they have guests, staffs, deliveries, elevators, service corridors, back entrance, constant flow of movement, right? And it's different from having a secure government facility. And when we would take these conference rooms, we would ask for the conference room closest to the farthest outlying wing, door, or whatever, where we could meet these people. And unless it was some kind of a final mission, and there would be, we've done a whole liquidation of a whole series or a whole type of weapon that we were eliminating, we'd ask for something bigger, like if you're inviting dignitaries and stuff. But it's just the teams. Well, then the teams would be, and the teams are about 8-10 people. On the nuclear side, there's sometimes 26 scientists. Is about the largest that we ever got to, right? But you had to think about security. I mean, hell. Have me as your $100 an hour, or maybe more than that, but done your security consultant to go do the correspondents dinner. It's like, geez, what were these guys doing? What are they getting paid for? What are they getting paid for? I don't know. Paid to be there, of course. But what do you do? It's great to be at these parties, but they're not supposed to be a party for you. You're supposed to be working. And so you can control a ballroom, don't you think? You can control a checkpoint, but controlling a hotel is going to be a little bit more difficult. But that is where one of the most sensitive gatherings in the country takes place, year after year, under the assumption that the system's going to, hold up, everything will be efficient and nothing will slip through. But somebody got lazy because it did. So this isn't just about security, but the illusion of security, because for years the American public has been told that the system works. Agencies are in control. Protective apparatus around leadership is impenetrable. You'll never get to him. And this guy didn't get to him. So I suppose that's a victory, right? And yet what we saw here isn't impenetrability. We saw permeability. A man with weapons got in the building. He made it close enough to create a real and active threat. And if one or two variables had shifted, timing, position, the conversation today would be a little bit different. But let's talk about the tone, because this is important. This isn't about partisan politics. It's not about whether you like Donald Trump or you dislike him. It's not about Republicans and Democrats. If you reduce it to that, you're once again missing the story. This is about a system, a political system, a security system, a system of society that is showing visible signs of inability, of strain. These signs aren't subtle any longer. This is happening too much. And I'm not one of those guys that, everybody check their phone, before you come in the hotel, so you're not taking pictures of so-and-so, or everybody getting cavity searched. I'm not for that. But obviously we need more than what we've been getting, especially under the old Trumpster. Now, Trump threw something out there. He said, somebody asked him why they think he was attacking, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said something about, they only go after the guys that are significant, the ones that matter. Well, you shouldn't be proud of some of the things that you've done, and I don't mean that you shouldn't be, but you shouldn't be proud of the fact that people are coming to get you. And there are a lot of people talking about this was a false flag. I listened to a couple of them yesterday. And I get the point, but I'm more a little bit in the middle on this. I don't think so. I wouldn't put it past the FBI for doing something like that, for getting someone to do it. That wouldn't surprise me a bit. Don't get me thinking that it cannot happen. It has happened. I'm probably far more on the side of that the Kennedy assassination was, I don't want to say planned, but certainly supported, in my view, by by some insiders, let's say. Political violence in the U.S. isn't an abstract concern any longer. It's no longer something you read about in the history book. It's here. It's present. It's increasing. It's increasing in boldness, and perhaps most troubling, it's becoming normalized. We've reached a point where an incident like this occurs, and within hours, it's already being absorbed, categorized, debated, and pushed aside to make room for the next attack, right? It's depressing, really. And that's not stability, it's acclimation, or acclimatization. You're getting used to it, And when society begins to get used to this kind of instability, then it's a danger. And not necessarily the next incident, but the gradual erosion of what you expect. We expect this now because it happens so often. We just expect it. And nobody has to be a professional anymore. Nobody has to. For example, you don't shoot to kill. You go and you knock him over, and well, okay. I'm generally against killing perpetrators. I don't think that's the result. But if you're actively killing someone, or you're if an immediate threat to someone, or if you got weapons and you're shooting and nobody knows what's going to happen, better you than me, right? And you're the idiot out here with guns. You took that choice, and so if you off somebody in that regard, okay. I don't like shoot first, ask questions later as a general theory. I don't like it, but I don't say that it's not sometimes, unfortunately, necessary. But security failures are unfortunate, but they're not shocking any longer. And once that mindset takes a hold, the threshold of what's considered acceptable varies, right? There are details around this event that raise legitimate questions, not wild theories, not conclusions, but questions. Reports say that the attacker wasn't immediately neutralized in a high-threat environment. And there are conflicting descriptions of exactly how far he got, exactly what level of access he was able to get, and exactly how the response unfolded. There are discussions about how individuals were evacuated, in what order, and under what protocols. And grabbing the vice president first, I'm not so sure. I mean, not that he shouldn't be protected, but it seems to me he's second in command. That's the way it is. These aren't trivial details. These are the kind of details that in any serious security review would determine whether an incident is contained effectively or whether it exposed procedural weaknesses, like I believe this one did. And then there's a strange coincidences. It should be treated as nothing more than that. It's a coincidence, which involved the pre-event remark of the phrase shots fired by Carolyn Levitt. She says, oh yeah, there'll be some shots fired tonight. She's talking about the speech. A bad phraseology right there, but it happened, clearly intended in a rhetorical or comedic sense. And in politics, that phrase, isn't unusual. But it means a verbal attack, sharp remarks, live exchanges, but when actual gunfire follows later the same evening, it creates a moment. No proof, no conspiracy, but of something that goes, there's a forecast for you. It reminds you that language, tone, and reality aren't as separate as sometimes we pretend they are, but there are going to be those who immediately jump to conclusions, and I've heard some of them already. Some will say this was simply a lone actor. I doubt that, me personally. A disturbed individual exploiting opportunity. Others will say the security failures are too significant to ignore and that something about the situation just doesn't add up. That's me. And then inevitably there will be those who move further on the speculation realm and say this was orchestrated, it's a false flag, staging the narrative or manipulating outcomes. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen in government all the time. There are a bunch of manipulative a-holes. It's all there is to it. And they, will definitely manipulate a story to squeeze the most out of it. Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? The responsible position I try to maintain, sometimes without success, is not to embrace these conclusions, but also not to get rid of the questions, because skepticism should work both ways. I'm a skeptic. no doubt. But I'm generally a skeptic in both directions. I don't trust any of them. They're all a bunch of lying a-holes. That's it. And they tell you what they think you want to hear because the truth doesn't matter. What matters is what you want to hear. And these people at this event are the kings and queens of that theory, no doubt. But it's irresponsible to just accept every official explanation without digging a little deeper, or assume every inconsistency is evidence of something more sinister, right? Somebody explains something. Oh, that's it then. The truth, as always, requires patience, evidence, and willingness to sit in uncertainty longer than most people are comfortable with. For years, I have been one of those people that, if possible, takes my time to make decisions. And people go, well, I already told you everything you need to know. Yeah, but I need to process it. You know what I mean? I need to process. And so, I remember practicing law. I'd write some big brief, some big something I had to file somewhere in federal court or whatever. And it, I tried to write it at least 3 times, write it once, get my initial arguments, what I thought, and then leave it sit a couple of days and then come and write it again. And then, maybe a week before it was due, try to write it a third time, do some research, put some thought process, and it mixes in your brain, while you're sitting there thinking about it, and you come to your conclusion. Now, a lot of people, that takes too long, and a lot of time you can't take that much time to figure out your path and to where you're going to go. But for me, once you've done that and you're solid in where you want to be, all the arguments, all the counter arguments, everything to it. But it's nice to take something like this and discuss, what does it mean and how do you think about it? So this thing again revealed another issue. You can say this with confidence, okay? A serious breach occurred at a high-profile, high-security environment. It exposed vulnerability, whether that was logistic, procedural, structural, that shouldn't exist at that high of a level. It demonstrated a protective bubble around political leadership sucks, once again. And it highlighted, once again, internal stability of the U.S. isn't as solid as it's portrayed. And perhaps most importantly, it revealed something about the times in which we are living. This is a country where political tension is high, where trust in institutions and in government is extraordinarily low, where rhetoric has become sharp, more personal, far more aggressive than it used to be. It's a country where a significant portion of the population is disconnected from the system. They are ignored by leadership of this type, and they're increasingly willing to view politics not as a process, but as a battleground. When those conditions exist, as they do here, incidents like this aren't entirely surprising, but they're not inevitable either. And unfortunately, they're not unthinkable these days. And that's an uncomfortable reality, because it means that this event isn't just about one guy. It's about the environment in which that individual exists, the pressure, the narrative, the tension that shape behavior of idiots that have nothing to do with any of it over time. You can't separate that act from the context in which it occurs. So, I suppose the question shouldn't simply be what happened at the dinner. The question should really be, what does it say about who we are? If political leadership of a country and the media leadership of a country can be gathered in one place in a major city under heavy security and still face a one-off lone dude, what does that tell you about the broader system? Seriously. If the illusion of control can be broken this easily, even momentarily, what else is less secure than we think it is? What else isn't as? What else aren't they telling us? And if this becomes just another story, just another headline, what does that say about what we're used to? We're used to this idiocy. Well, so there you have it. I tell you what, it is a bother to me that this kind of thing goes on, and it goes on far too often. I'm going to share with you something to break the mood, because I tell you what, this is one of the songs I heard, and it's only a couple minutes long, but it's probably not something you'll hear on this station very much. But I like it. And we're going to listen to it in its entirety. It is called Freaks.
The bass and the tweeters make the speakers go to war. The mighty trumpet brings the freaks out to the floor. The bass and the tweeters make the speakers go to war. The mighty trumpet brings the freaks out to the floor. Tell me, where the freaks at? Tell me, where the freaks at? Freaks at, freaks at, freaks at, freaks at. Tell me where the freaks at. Tell me where the freaks at.
Freaks everywhere, including at the Correspondents Dinner. Oh, here he is on the headline. Shooter behind the headline. There he is, laying on the floor. He's all laying on the floor. Wonder how he feels after that. Well, he got a little bit attacked there, didn't he? But he didn't get shot. So, I don't know. That's the end of that tune. What did Trump say? Trump says he ordered the Navy to shoot and kill the Iran mine-laying boats in the Straits of Hormuz. I've ordered the United States Navy to shoot and kill any boat, small boat, as though they may be at the bottom of the sea. That is putting mines in the water in the Straits of Hormuz. There is to be no hesitation, etc., etc. Yep. This is getting better, isn't it? No, it's not. I'm going to do a segment on Iran as well that we're going to go through. But I want to go to, where am I going? I'm going, I believe, to Ukraine. Going off to Ukraine. And I want to, where am I? So that I'm still in the Correspondents Dinner. Hold on. We're going to let's see. Oh, that's the Iran one. Sorry, we're going to get to Iran in just a minute. But we need some. Well, you know what? Let's do Iran second. We're going to Ukraine. So the core argument. So Lavrov gave some speeches over the weekend. Zakharova gave a speech. I listened to both of them whilst driving somewhere, and they're interesting. And Lavrov's core argument is that the collective West has openly moved from indirect pressure to open war. So over the weekend, there was a series of... So Russia is testing borders, okay? So I listened to another guy that analyzes war all the time, and I forget which one it was, whether it was Alex Christoforou or whether it was a military summary channel guy, I don't remember. But they showed the video and showed the radar scenario of, call it 40 to 50 Russian drones flying over the Black Sea into Odessa area and then going south toward the Romanian border. Okay, and they were headed toward the Romanian border, and suddenly 2/3 of them disappeared. Suddenly, a little bit further, and normally that would be if they all were blown, had reached their target and blown something up. Of course, they're no longer going to be visible on as a signal, radar signal that you have it. But the curiosity and the method of this attack. So the Russians have been doing in the neighborhood of 600. There was a big deal about 666. Everybody knows the 3 6s deal. 666 drones flying into Ukraine in the 1 day period, that the Ukrainians were attacking. And then the curiosity of how they went. Then this one came up. And so Russia is pushing because the summer offensives are all coming. And Ukraine doesn't have any people left. So the joke is that they've received $90,000 from people that don't have the money to loan them, Europe, to fight a war they cannot win against Russia, to buy weapons from the United States that no longer exist because the U.S. has either used them all or has refused to sell them because they're going to need them for their own purposes. And all this is going to be done with $90 billion that's going to help defend soldiers that can't use any of the weapons anyway because they don't exist either. So the only thing that does exist is the $90 billion in Zelensky's pocket. There was a story, where is this? That, hang on a second, I got to find this. Where the Zelensky is headed now. Because Zelensky, he's going everywhere trying to get more people. I reported that last week, where he was going all over Europe trying to get more people. And he's trying to get them to send at least the men back, to stop giving them free money, stop giving them free housing, and ship them back to Ukraine so he can send them to the front lines to die. And so Kiev, right now, Zelensky's in the Middle East, and he's trying to sell his war experience to United Arab Emirates, to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar. He's trying to, to Bahrain. He wants to sell this. And so his activity in the Middle East is an attempt to find new political, financial oxygen at a moment when usual supporters are far less reliable. For years, he's been able to build its strategy on the assumption that the U.S. and Europe are going to continue to give him weapons, money, intelligence, and diplomatic protection as a non-president for the second year now. But now, American support, nobody wants it. I mean, what the hell have we heard about Ukraine here lately? Nothing. There are people that are very angry about this. A lot of Democrats still want their money laundering schemes to be going on, but now the money laundering is exclusively the territory of Europe, and Europe is the one given 90 billion. They are the money launderer, and they launder the money through Ukraine, just like everybody else did. But now, it doesn't go to the Bidenopolis, to come in and go to Biden's son through Burisma, or now it's figuring out how to fund Jared Kushner. It's the other way around. Everybody else gets the money, and so we just exchange it around. But Zelensky, either way, is finding out that a lot of these things are no longer as profitable for him, and he's trying to, maybe every once in a while he is still trying to protect his country long term. It doesn't seem like it. Everybody's dying, and you got to stop the bleeding first. So, his, European concert tour and now his Middle East concert tour, where he gets to take the comedy on the road, aren't going to pan out for him. Is what there's an entire article on it if you're interested in reading it that somebody wrote, and I'm not going to share the whole thing, but it's written by a guy who's the president of Middle East Studies and a visiting lecturer at the Moscow. It's an international political institute. A guy named Morad Zadigzadia. I can't spell it. Zadigzadia. I can't say it correctly. I don't know. Crazy times indeed. Crazy times. But in Ukraine, they're not being treated as a sovereign country by the West and haven't been for a long time. And this activity on the south border of Ukraine and the activity of Zelensky in the Middle East are just indicators of what's really going on. Allegedly, now I haven't finalized this review yet to see whether it really occurred. It wouldn't surprise me if it did. But the talk is that Europe has taken an additional step further. Specifically, Great Britain, England has taken another step. And what happened was, as these 30 to 50 missiles were headed toward the border of Romania, which, they would have never crossed anyway, is in my view, but they were attacking south of Odessa. It wouldn't surprise me if there was some kind of a test, because they've been talking about it for a long time. The drones are coming from the Ukrainian side. They're flying over NATO territories and coming across. And so, Finland is talking about removing everything for nuclear weapons. And so Russia is prepping also for a war by 2030 with Europe, all of it, because the Europeans are pushing for that. And so the Russians, what do you think they're going to do? Not defend themselves? And so now they're testing, because they believe two things. One, that some huge shipments of new missiles, new weaponry is coming up specifically through the ports, but they'll land, instead of the port city of Odessa, they'll land in port cities in Bulgaria and Romania, come that way, right? And on the Black Sea. And Romania is just south of Odessa. And so what they will do is, what Russia, I believe, was doing, it was make reasonable sense to me, is flying these drones up to the border to see what had happened, and there's a couple of small cities, I forget what they are, but they were attacking some of those cities, and there were a decent amount of attacks in those two cities. But they're only 3-4 kilometers from the border of Romania. And so what they're alleging occurred is that the British foreign ministry gave the authority to British fighter pilots flying in Romania to shoot down Russian drones over Ukraine. Now, that's an act of war against Russia. And there's no doubt of it. They remember there was huge talks about it, whether Poland could shoot down Russian drones that are flying in the western half of Ukraine, because Ukraine doesn't have enough air defense to do it. And Russia has said consistently, you shoot down our airplanes, our drones, our missiles. That is an act of war. You are involved, and there's no doubt that's true. You're involved. So it's definitely an act of war. And now that Romania has done it, the British have quickly said, nope, not us. The Romanians are going, yeah, they did. Romanians are saying they sure did give the authority to these British pilots flying British planes over Romania to fire into Ukraine and take out drones in Ukraine, Russian drones in Ukraine. Now, that's an air defense because there is no air defense down there, really. Ukraine's out of air defense anyway. So basically, it's the British providing air defense. So Lavrov coming out and saying Ukraine isn't being treated as a sovereign country by the West. It's being treated as a weapons system. And he says that the U.S., unlike Europe, has at least publicly acknowledged some of the concerns of Russia: no NATO for Ukraine, recognition of territorial reality after the referendums. The Europeans are still speaking the language of total victory, just like Trump is in Iran. They're talking, what, total victory? We're winning. You're not winning. And Russia has to, move away. We don't move. Why? Because the rules only apply to others, never to us, right? The Americans sometimes are speaking the language of ugly reality, according to Lavrov. That does not make Washington innocent. It just means Europe may be more delusional than Washington. Which isn't a contest anyone should really want to win. These people are nuts. And the Ukraine is reportedly received or is approved for this 90 billion euro loan package and already is signaled that it needs another 20 billion. We need another 20 billion. 90 billion is not enough. That's only going to cover us. That'll only mean we can keep this war going another year and a half. We need a full 2 years out of it, or we're never going to beat those Ruskies. We're not going to beat them. Well, you're not going to beat them anyway. And the fact that all of Europe is leaning toward this total global thermonuclear war, they should bring in, what was the kid from War Games? Same kid from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, bring in that guy. Let's play. Shall we play a game? Global thermonuclear war. That's where we're headed, people. If you listen to all the smarty pantses in Europe, that's where we're headed. And that is truly what they wish for the rest of us. And I don't know. Think about this. Here's the Finnish government. Here's what the Finnish government says to us. Well, her name is Riikka Purra. She has warned of growing pressure on the country's finances. This is Finland, a pretty rich country. The warning comes just days after the government unveiled a multi-year fiscal plan increasing military aid to Ukraine and domestic spending cuts to their own citizenry. The government's fiscal plan for 2027 to 2030 was presented earlier this week. It includes 240 million euro in cuts to social and healthcare spending, but increase of 300 million to increase military support for Ukraine. The state of public finances, she said, is extremely difficult, and the debt to GDP ratio is approaching 90%, she said in an interview on Saturday. We've been hit not only by external shocks, she said, adding the nation struggles with high unemployment, zero economic growth, and an aging population. The fiscal plan agreed to by the government sets out public spending cuts and changes to household costs in welfare, healthcare. But planned savings are higher customer fees. That's okay. We'll pass it on to them across the healthcare system, covering specialist exams, surgery, outpatient visits, health center and dental care, as well as charges for storing a deceased person and determining his cause of death. meaning they're not going to spend as much time on that. Apart from providing increased military support for Ukraine, the plan allocates additional fundings to strengthen drone defense. In further setting out for more money, they want the ambition to gradually raise their defense target toward the 5% that Daddy Trump required for NATO. Finland joined NATO in April of 2023. According to the World Bank, the country spent around 1.3 to 1.7% of GDP on defense prior to that time. Helsinki has since increased its defense budget with plans to raise spending to 3.2% by 2030, bringing the nation closer to the target of 3.5% by 2035. Finnish officials repeatedly echo other NATO members claiming that Russia is a permanent threat to EU members, and while increasing defense spending to counter it, Finland shares a 1,300-kilometer or 800-mile border with the Ruskies. The Kremlin and me reject these claims and accuse the West of fueling Russophobia to justify military buildup and also to divert attention from their own domestic problems. Everything has to be blamed on the Russians. There was an interesting article, and I wonder if it's just a movie. No, they have the article too. A guy named Sergei Karaganov. He was on a program in an interview with Alexander Karevsky on Russia 24, and he argued that it's been a source of global conflict. He said, Western Europe is becoming increasingly drawn into the war in Ukraine, citing the stuff going on south of Odessa and this idiocy going on in the rest of Europe. Statements are already being made by officials and news reports regarding EU prep for war, with more concerns and questions. How should Russia respond? As an example, he said, let's mention the news the Germans have already produced 5,000 drones based on Ukrainian designs. It's laughable to hear that. What Ukrainian designs, he said. It is clear the German defense industry is directly working on drones striking Russia. And you remember the Taurus missiles? The Germans have made a clever move. They don't formally supply such weapons, and now they've decided to say they provide drones. And what they're doing is they're manufacturing them now, or claiming that they're manufactured in Ukraine. But the targeting still has to be provided by the Germans, just like our Tomahawks would require U.S., and the Storm Shadow would require British or whichever it was, French, and it's nuts. So sooner or later, a countermeasure will have to be found for drones that are drones are far more dangerous than missiles nowadays, and that depends on how they're being used. But the issue is still very complex, and Sergei Shoigu said that there are legitimate targets on EU territory because they were talking about drones being shot down over Ukraine by other countries. And he says that makes them, just like U.S. providing Tomahawks would make the U.S. an enemy combatant. And they've been pretty consistent in saying that. And the Europeans have generally been fairly careful about making sure that they don't cross those lines. But they're crossing. They're trying to seize ships. Somebody said they wanted to take Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is a little chunk of Russia that is west of the Baltic states. It's separate from Russia, just like the part in Moldova, Transnistria, that is a separate sliver of Moldova that stayed with Russia. And Kaliningrad, same thing. It's on the Baltic Sea, but it's not connected to the rest of Russia. And you got to go through Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, to get there. A little bit of Poland even, and certainly Belarus to be over there. And so it's not attached. And so there's somebody else, England, they're going to take Kaliningrad. We're just going to take Kaliningrad. Russians can't have that. Let's have an act of war. I mean, sort of tongue-in-cheek, like I used to think that the Donald Trump, oh, geez, we're stealing Greenland, kind of the same thing. But people are just, the world's nuts these days. And so Sergei Shoigu said that there are legitimate targets in the EU. Ministry of Defense published a list of locations where the drones are being manufactured. I shared that with you last week. And in response, the EU spokesperson Anita Hipper stated, here's a quote, "The European Commission has no evidence of the Russian Federation claims." In other words, in their view, we're making up attacks on our cities, on our infrastructure. This is what's his name, continuing to speak, Alexander Karevsky, say, actually he was interviewing this other guy, but he said the countries reported include strategic civilian infrastructure. Countries reported this. Finland, Baltic states are pretending they don't know anything about these drones flying over their territory. And they said, we see something flying past here, and they didn't. It was a way to say that Russia was flying. Anyway, these type of stories are becoming more and more prevalent. I mean, he also said, he made in his comment, he said, Lavrov did on this part, he said, World War III is already upon us. That is what he said. And he said, in a lot of respects, World War III is already here. And, it's hard to stay out of it. It's hard to not believe that kind of thing. And, the global military spending is freaking unbelievable these days. It is a record high. There was a report that came out, the continent's expenditure, the European continent, the expenditure has risen by 14%. European military spending has propelled global defense expenditures to a record high of nearly $3 trillion in 2025, despite the U.S. decreasing its own outlay. This was reported by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Worldwide, military expenditures rose 2.9% in real terms last year to $2.887 trillion, marking the 11th consecutive annual increase and lifting the global military burden to 2.5% of GDP. CIPRI experts explain the trend by citing several conflicts and persisting geopolitical tensions. The entire European continent accounted for the largest increase, with spending going up 14% to $864 billion. CIPRI linked the surge to the Ukraine conflict, a standoff with Russia, the ongoing pursuit of European self-reliance, and increasing pressure from the United States for burden sharing within the alliance. In total, NATO members in Europe spent a combined $559 billion in 2025. Germany's outlay is 24% of that. That's not right. Germany's outlays all by itself went up 24% to $114 billion. And Spain jumped up 50% to $40 billion. But they're still far too low. U.S. military expenditure fell 7.5% to $954 billion. CIPRI linked a surprise decline, that is a surprise, to the Trump administration's refusal to approve new assistance to Ukraine, in contrast to previous years when $127 billion in direct military support was authorized. The U.S. continues deliveries through the NATO coordinated programs, and other Western countries are footing the bill. So that's the difference. Last week, Pentagon officials said Trump was advocating a military budget, I brought this to you, of $1.5 trillion to provide new funds for a Golden Dome missile system, AI capabilities, and a new class of battleship. I'm not for this. That's the silence part right there. CIPRI noted Russia's defense expenditure is $190 billion, while Ukraine's spending went up by 20% to $84 billion, the equivalent of 40% of its GDP, which is the seventh largest military spender in the world. China increased its military spending by 7.4% to $336 billion, and Japan went up to $62 billion. Taiwan is at $18.2 billion. Moscow condemns what it described as a reckless militarization by the EU, especially since it is aimed at Russia. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said that the European propaganda seeks to turn Russia into a model external enemy to divert attention from their own internal crises. Things in Europe. There's something that I might end up sharing with you after I watch it later this week. There's something called Chernobyl 40, the true story of the world's worst nuclear catastrophe, is something in my block to watch. And because we are the 40th anniversary of that. So I played a song that I heard over the weekend, and I haven't heard it in forever, and so I played it for you earlier. Here is another one, and this might bring back some memories, as it did for me, because this was a little bit on the funny side for me. I hope you enjoy it. You know what? We're going to start that over. I've moved up the wrong paddle, so we're going to start it over just because we don't want to miss it. This is a song that we're going to ruin if we don't hear it all.
Basketball Jones, I got a basketball Jones, got a basketball Jones. Yes, I'm the victim of a basketball Jones. Ever since I was a little baby, I always be dribbling. In fact, I was the baddest dribbler in the whole neighborhood. Then one day, my mama bought me a basketball, and I love that basketball. I took that basketball with me everywhere I went. That basketball was like a basketball to me. I even put that basketball underneath my pillow. Maybe that's why I can't sleep at night. I need help, ladies and gentlemen. I need someone to stand beside me. I need someone to set a pick for me at the free throw line of life. Someone I can pass to. Someone to hit the open man on the give and go. And not end up in the popcorn machine. So cheerleaders, help me out. I got a basketball job. Oh, that sounds so sweet. I got a basketball job. Come on, Coach Food and Red Blade, sing along with us. Everybody, yeah, I do. I want everybody in the whole state to stand up and sing along. Everybody watching Coast to Coast, sing along with us. Bill Russell, sing along with us.
Terrible, terrible times. That was what, 1970 something? You know who that was? That was Cheech and Chong, actually, that came out with that song. I remember my older brothers playing that song. So when you have 11 kids in your family, you share a bedroom, right? Me and my brother were in a basement room with a concrete floor. You know, it was mostly an unfinished basement. And it had a living area down there that was always full of Dad always took TVs and radios, tore them apart, and would, make new ones or turn around. So he played with electronics and stuff like that in his very little bit of spare time. And then my brothers were on the other end of the house. There were the three older in the basement anyway. There were 5 of us boys in the basement. And then, that was a crowded little house. But you'd hear my brothers playing their music, and you'd get stuff like this. Lots of Jethro Tull coming from that end of the house too, though. But also plenty of Cheech and Chong, and that was a Cheech and Chong album. I want to finish off the show today with a little bit of discussion about the Iran with and I've had some time to think about this and put things together, but I don't want to, the advertising going around about this from the powers that be doesn't match reality, and I think that's important to note from the jump. But I don't want to frame Iran as winning. I don't think anyone is winning this war. It is not the presumption I want to put out there. It is too cheap, too childish for the scale of what is really happening. Iran has suffered assassinations, decapitations of power up on top, bombing all over, economic pressure everywhere, infrastructure threat. And I mean, here we are back again to what was going on 2-3 weeks ago. We're going to take out all your power plants, and we're going to destroy all your desalinization and any water abilities and blah, blah, blah. And then the decapitation strikes are going to continue. We're going to take out the next level. Well, that's not victory for Iran. Sure as hell isn't victory for the United States. But the mistake in Washington, in my view, is assuming that because Iran has and is suffering, Iran has lost, and Iran is therefore broken. This is the old imperial fantasy still rearing its ugly head. Hit a country hard enough, kill enough of its leaders, freeze enough of its money, seize enough of its ships, and eventually the people will crawl out from under the table and thank you for allowing them the opportunity, in fact, the privilege of surrendering and allowing you to be the new leader of their country. I don't think that's going to happen. That is not how old civilizations behave. That's not how a proud country behaves. And it's especially not how Iran behaves after nearly a half a century of resisting American pressure. Trump said something about, all these other presidents before me for the last 50 years have just been idiots. We were in charge of Iran under the Shah. I mean, sure, that was another imperial. We're like imperial stormtroopers from Star Wars. We're in charge of Iran. That doesn't mean Iran wanted us there even then. I was just a kid when that happened. When 79, I remember it. I remember the assassinations. I remember all of those things that went on and what happened in Iran. Trump is still complaining about that. And he made some commentary that, well, all these other presidents, they should have done something. And people are bringing up this 49 years, we've been fighting Iran. Well, because you had put in a leadership that wasn't their leadership. You know what I mean? It was your leadership. It was totally subordinate to America, and that's that. And it had to, you had to do what the CIA told you to do, and that's the end. And they got out of that. Whether you agree with it or not, doesn't matter. That is their country, their self-determination. The U.S. is not the colonialist of the world, or shouldn't be, in my humble opinion. Anyway, the Trump's policy of non-negotiation, capitulation dressed up as diplomacy, another demand. Every day, another demand. Every day, something different, where we demand X. And, this capitulation is all he's after. Same thing that the Europeans are demanding of Russia. Well, capitulate. We're right, you're wrong. We're important, you're not. Our opinions are important, yours are not. And that is absolutely not the case if you're an Iranian. They don't think that way. So I'm not, and I don't know. I'm only taking this from the point of view of claiming that we've already won. And put me in, Coach. Hegseth is always ready to talk about. Oh, we already won. It's over. We're done. We're up here. That we don't need peace. We just need to keep on bombing them, and eventually they'll give up. Well, I'm not so sure that's the case. And financially, I'm totally I'm almost positive it's not the case. Financially, they've been sanctioned forever, and they've been, their assets frozen forever. The money has been, probably the same as our Social Security system, has already been robbed, and it's gone. And so Trump is demanding that Iran surrender to America and Israel, and then says it plainly. The Iranians say, "Well, that ain't happening. We're not just gonna surrender. It will not happen." So the point isn't that Iran is invincible. They're not. The point is that the Trump assumption that they will capitulate is wrong. You can continue to hurt Iran. You can continue to make them bleed. You could even continue to punish them. But the idea that it's going to, fold, the government's going to fold because Netanyahu and Trump want to, or because Trump says, I'm not going to be Mr. Nice Guy anymore, is schoolyard bully policy. That's it. And it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And Americans have no appetite right now for sending troops, putting them on the ground inside another Afghanistan. And this would be worse than Afghanistan. By far worse. And I think that is a crucial point. Trump needs to have an exit strategy because the U.S. has no military option that can allow it to win the war. Now, I watched something over the weekend with allegedly, not the top level, not the Secretary of the Army or Secretary of Defense, but so Trump is the one who gives the orders. Those orders go to the operational commanders, CENTCOM, Central Command, and stuff like that. And that those commanders have pushed back hard and said, this is not a good idea, no matter how you slice it. It's not something that, is going to be profitable. There's also been a lot of reports over the weekend, and I suggest you check them out, that the depth of destruction of American military might in the Middle East is vastly underreported, at least as far as the major bases like Al Udeid in Qatar and whichever the ones are in Bahrain and even into Saudi Arabia, that There's been stories for a long time about the U.S. military that were housed on those bases living in local hotels. A couple of hotels have been blown up, and then they twist the rhetoric to say, well, look, these guys are attacking hotels. They're attacking hotels because those are the ones where the military are staying, that they are moving into hotels. And the depth of destruction of American might in the Middle East, at least on land in these bases that were initially bombed, is astronomical. And it'd be nice to go over there and check this out. Truthfully, I'd like to go see it myself, but I don't believe necessarily either side of that. But there are plenty of stories about it, and this allegation that the U.S. has no military option to allow it to win the war is only the escalation ladder favors Iran, not Washington. And I think that's an important point. The U.S. can bomb. It can seize more ships. It can threaten bridges, power plants, refineries, and ports. But if Iran responds by fully disrupting the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, Gulf energy infrastructure, desalination plants, and continues to affect these vital shipping arteries, then Washington is no longer punishing Iran all by itself. And unfortunately, that's what's happening. So some economist or another, I forget who I was listening to, said that we're now 8 weeks into the war in Iran. 8 weeks. And the 8 weeks of war is about the length of time it takes for shipping of container ships and oil ships and aluminum ships and whatever, fertilizer ships from the Straits of Hormuz area, from the Iran area, from Iranian ports to around the world, and that the first ones that left those days, the last that were leaving, are arriving right now. And so we don't even recognize how much the next 4 weeks, let's say, is going to have an effect on the prices, because now is when it's going to become far more noticeable because of just the realities of shipping and how it works. So I don't know. That doesn't mean Iran's won a victory, not remotely. Nobody has, but Iran has survived the very first premise of the war, which said that it would collapse, panic, surrender, and that's the real story. And if we just hit them and they fold, put me and Coach can say, well, we got him. We got him on the run. He can fire a few more generals if he likes, for disagreeing and for saying that everything isn't absolutely positive. Let's fire the next level of them. Who are we decapitating here? You get rid of all your military experience in the command, and that's the end of that, right? It doesn't go that way. Let's see here. Perhaps we'll take a call here. Hello, sir. How may I help you?
Hey, how you doing?
Pretty good on a Monday.
Awesome. Hey, on the Iran topic, suppose those 13 bases are blown up, and they won't talk about the aircraft carriers won't charge right into the Gulf and dominate, right?
Oh, they won't do that.
So,
and that'd be a fool's errand to do that. It really would.
So why did they send another aircraft carrier then?
Well, because they're all we have left are threats and stealing of other people's shipments. We stopped another Iranian ship today, and I don't believe it's going to work.
And you know that. How does the news get away with, like you said, if we're winning, why don't they show a tally? You know what I'm saying? I think
one thing I'd like to see
have been hit, and 3 out of 4 THAADs have been knocked out. And
Yeah, I'm certain of that. And those THAAD radars, I don't believe many of them exist, and those are extremely expensive. I went to, when I lived in Qatar, I was on Al Udeid rather frequently. I could go out there and use the PX and go buy stuff out there, stuff like that. And I tried to get a couple of contracts out there, speaking Russian or something, going out and trying to do something. And I was in the contractor pool out there. And so I would go out and see what they were doing in there, and there didn't appear to be a ton of defense. Now, it was 2015, okay, the year that I lived there. So that's 10 years ago. But what I would love to do, and I haven't been to Qatar. I was there a couple years ago. I went and
Qatar.
Yeah, it's Qatar. They say Qatar, and so that's how I say it. But it doesn't matter. And I was out there, and I would go and check these places out. And I would love to, and I think if I go back, I'm trying to schedule a trip to Egypt, and I'm also trying to get back to Turkey and maybe go into southern Russia again later this summer. And I think I'm going to take Qatar Airways because I like flying into Doha, and there's a couple of things I want to take care of in Doha that I want to go see.
Can I break in for a second?
Please.
What? So it's going to hurt the Iranians if they have to stop pumping oil, but it's not going to hurt the Saudis or.
It's absolutely going to hurt all of them, and that's the unfortunate part. Is we're just going to notice this right now, because right now it's 8 weeks later, and the real effect. Everything is talked about oil futures. But what about oil today? What's being delivered today is far more important than the futures of what's coming on. And every time whether it's a Trump ally or not, making millions and millions of dollars betting on oil futures, that doesn't matter. What matters is the actual flow. And all over East Asia, they are without. They have strict limits on how much they can buy, and we don't want that to come to this country. I mean, I hate it that it's in those countries. They're just normal people too, trying to get through their days, and the government and we meaning Iran, Israel, United States, are cocking it up for the rest of the world. That's what's happening, unfortunately, and it's affecting everyone.
I listened to another show, and the guy says that Trump's going to wrap it all up, and they're going to win the midterms, and
I am less sure of that.
Powerhouse.
I am not sure of that at all.
Not sure at all.
Not remotely sure. I mean, all kind of bets. People bet out there, and did you hear about the guy who bet on Maduro? And he was a member of the strike team, and he put a $30,000 bet that Maduro would be taken out of power, and he made $400,000 on his bet. Did you hear about that?
Yeah. Did you hear about the Trump son buying into the drone company that they got the giant contract? And
yeah, I know.
It's funny how they MAGA people learn the Leering Center. They know some things that are so inconsequential, and they know Hunter Biden had a cush-ass job. But ask any of them if they know anything about their coin exchange or taking money for that ballroom
I'm not an anti-Trumper by any stretch. I am anti-Trump ideas of internationally for sure.
If it's not a dictatorship, it sure is close, because the Congress ain't going to do anything to him.
Well, no, but they're lazy anyway. They don't do anything to anybody. That's not necessarily Trump's fault. He's just using the system as it's presented, and
that's MAGA's fault.
Well, but it's the same in any party. I mean, that I have equal contempt for all the way across the board. It doesn't matter who's in charge. I'm against it. And you're supposed to rule upon some sort of consensus, and consensus never matters. Day one, new president comes in, everything reverses 180 degrees, and you're supposed to hate everybody that was there the day before. And that is exactly what we do. The same thing's going to happen in 2.5 years when the next guy comes in. And it's going to be the same thing. That's America, buddy.
Yay.
Yay. All right, I got to wrap up the show. We only have a few more minutes. I appreciate your call. You have a very nice day.
Okay, you too.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye-bye. Well, and there he goes. So I wanted, I kind of call this, if I had to come up with something, I'd call the Trump presidency kind of a stick in the eye sort of presidency. Trump's posture on many, many things. And by the way, again, I'm not anti-Trump, especially nationally. Nationally, I like a lot of that. I wouldn't go as far as he did, on many things, I don't know what. I don't want to pick them, but I wouldn't go as far as some of the things he did. Tariffs, international stuff, I've disagreed with a lot of this stuff. Not saying absolutely not, but there are better ways to skin a cat. And the Trump way is less like diplomacy and more like a guy trying to close a hostile business deal. Has he ever had a friendly business deal? That's what I want to know. Is it always got to be hostility? He never says, here's some mutual guarantees, Iran. Here's some mutual guarantees, Russia, Ukraine. Let me help resolve this. Here's a security architecture. He says, surrender, call me. I'll take care of everything after that. You don't need leaders. I'll appoint your leaders, or if you don't do that, I'll just destroy more of your country. And it's like, it's an incredible arrogance. I mean, it's just, I'm God, that's that. And I don't, I understand and appreciate that he's a successful and, I don't know what. I still, think highly of some of the things that he does. But more and more, internationally, there's a lot of lack of MAGA support for what he's doing, and because people are finally catching on that this really isn't a good idea, and it's really not. And I'm definitely on that side, although, this is not a part of a deeper disease. Trump didn't invent it. Trump didn't invent this disease, people. He just says it louder with less diplomacy. He doesn't pretty it up at all, and he puts more exclamation points and capital letters in it. And so the Obama-Biden comparison, you think these guys had, they had, some day one stick in the eye policies. We won. We're doing it. Live with it. Elections have consequences, that kind of thing. This is what we have watched for my entire adult life. It's crap. It's really crap. This is not what normal thinking people want. They want stability. And we don't have it. Every 4 years, we have some kind of weird upheaval and a bunch of people on TV saying, cheerleading. And that's it. We have lunatics running into press correspondents dinners and trying to kill people. We have people shooting at politicians. It's nuts. This is not persuasive to me. Any of it. And it's not statecraft. It's dominant performance brought to you by Hollywood and the people that believe this is how it's supposed to be. We have a hero at the end of every movie. The hero's got to win, right? The hero's got to win. That ain't how life works. It sure as hell ain't how statecraft really works. It's performative. It's politics of humiliating the other side in public and then acting surprised when the other side doesn't cooperate with you. It might work for campaign rallies, but it doesn't work with nations that have history, pride, religion, memory, and their own dead bodies all over the ground. The political cost is very real, and I'm not so sure that in November people aren't going to be punished for this. I appreciate you listening to the show. This is International Flavor. I am Samuel Trapp. You're listening to Damn Radio, and we're damn glad that you do. Listen to us all the time. damradio.com/live. If you'd like the International Flavor shows, go on out to internationalflavor.com and download them all for your listening pleasure, and damradio.com/podcast for all the rest of the programs. Have a beautiful mid-Missouri week.